Ben, just in the nick of time, joining from the UK today. It's been September, October since we had coffee in London. So really excited to catch up with you. We literally haven't spoken 3 words since then. So I'm really excited. I've been
Oh, I
following
think
you on
Happy
LinkedIn.
Thanksgiving. Happy
Probably,
Thanksgiving, I
well,
think
all
I
right,
managed to
probably
get
a
in
couple messages on
there.
WhatsApp. That's right. Yeah. But I'm anxious to hear what you've been doing. I know you've taken on a new initiatives, launched some new projects, and I mean you have an amazing read on the DeFi, NFT, all things Web3. I feel like so. Let's dive in. Why don't you give everyone a bit of an intro? This is just a 15-minute over lunch chat.
Absolutely.
We're catching up over coffee again, so let everybody know who you are and what you're up to, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, many thanks indeed, Jonathan. It's always good to catch up. Following on from the why baked beans conversation that we had when we did meet
That was
up
a
in
crucial.
person.
That's a crucial.
It's an
That's a
important
crucial
question. It's an
conversation.
important question. I know since that point, I've launched a venture studio called NetCon Ventures. So I've been operating in the Web3 space for a couple of years now. So we got in touch, would have been probably early 2022, I think, late
I think
2021,
I think
22,
that's right. Yeah.
when I was involved more in the DAO space. And then since that point, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole into DAO governance. So DAOs are a wonderful idea in principle. In practice, they fundamentally don't work at the moment. There's all kinds of issues around governance, around how they operate, around how to structure them. Are they legally permissible? I mean, I'm singing to the choir here, right? You already know all
Exactly.
of this
I
stuff.
describe DAOs as the hardest organizational entity to structure ever. Right. There's no
Oh,
way to, unless we're talking interplanetary connections, there's no way to make these more difficult to deal with. But I mean, there's potential, but yes, so many issues with DAO.
absolutely. But I mean, from off the back of that, went deep into a corporate governance rabbit hole, which is incredibly exciting, as I'm sure many people can appreciate. Started reading around network governance, decentralized network governance, network organizations, and off the back of that, came across this concept of a value network. So instead of a given firm growing in a linear fashion whereby you take in external capital, you hire more people, you extend your capacity to the limits of potentially the capital or the capabilities of the individual, you can grow in a network manner. So you can plug into existing firms and then enhance their capabilities. And thought, okay, that's pretty interesting. That sounds a little bit like the way that a DAO could theoretically operate. And then came across some other industry partners who've been applying basically the same set of principles to the VC space. So looking for ways to take a startup in, and instead of it being a case of investing some funds, looking for more of a supply chain type approach. So we can take an idea in and then give the startup exactly what it needs and then spit out hopefully a functioning product at the end of it. So moving away from that 95% rate of startup failure, 75% failure rate for funded startups as well, looking to improve those odds slightly. So that's kind of where NetCon Ventures came about, is a confluence between corporate governance, research, DAOs, VC, and just networking as a whole.
Yeah, sounds like the venture studio model that I came across the last couple of years. I feel like maybe it's just
Mm.
I wasn't paying attention, or maybe it was happening, and I just didn't know the right people. But I feel like that, like you said, that's the idea. Money goes in. It's not necessarily friendly to the founders. You've sometimes it's hit and miss with the VC studios or VC firms that you're working with, and whether or not they're going to be helpful. And much more hand holding. You're right. You eliminate a lot of the barriers that are going to be thrown up, through startups life. And then, of course, your expertise in Web3, being able to bring that in gives you that really interesting niche. What's
Yeah, I
your
mean, it's been fascinating from just learning what the common struggles are, because the majority of founders, when they're looking for third-party capital investors, most of the time they're looking for value add. There was a study that was run in the UK a couple of years ago. It says like 93% of founders are looking for value add in some capacity, and a similar percentage of VCs say that they offer it. But then these founders who engage with these VCs were then surveyed. basically asking, did you get what you were sold? And 60% or so of the founders said they felt as though they've been duped. Introductions, right? It's like a Rolodex. It's basically a meme at this point. It's like it can introduce you to these various people. A lot of the time, founders aren't getting what they're sold as. So value add is something that's actually lacking. So that's been really interesting to learn about.
And founders, especially first-time founders, tend to have such little
Absolutely.
negotiation power
Yeah.
that this has got to be a godsend for them to run into someone like you with with the idea that we're here for the long run. What's your take on Bitcoin jumping up and jumping up and jumping up? I mean, that's been certainly dominated the news. Has it made a difference in your personal professional life the last few months?
Things have got busier. It's interesting. A lot of the stuff that's been going on behind the scenes that hasn't changed. So the people who are building are still building. They're just building with slightly more noise around them. As the focus does seem to be coming back to the industry, that's really the only thing that's changed. There is more of that passive interest. It does seem like people are starting to move quicker. It does feel like there's that sense of urgency is now starting to come back. It feels like there's a little bit less justification for existence, as spot ETF approvals and the likes of BlackRock, $9 trillion of assets under management getting involved is, I mean, it's a pretty big vote of confidence for the industry as a whole and the technology. So a lot of the loudest naysayers don't really have a huge amount to say. Now, has that affected my day to day on a personal basis? Not really. There's just more noise to sift through now.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me. I feel like the clients, I had a lot of inquiries in 2022. 2023
Mm,
was quieter, but the projects that were still building, that had good projects, they kept building just quietly. They were less focused on fundraising, more focused on their product. And I feel like as we've ended 22 or ended 23 and into 24, that suddenly everyone's got a little more money than they did.
yep.
Their crypto is worth more, and so they say, well, let's deploy a bit. It's interesting. One other startup that I'm working with, um, they have a product, but it's pre revenue, pre customers, and one of the founders said to me, he kind of wished that Bitcoin had stayed low because he wanted to get money in and then appreciate from there. He didn't want the appreciation to happen outside the company. So different perspectives based on the interests and on
Mhm.
capital and what's in the wallets.
Yeah, I mean, you raise an interesting point there as well. I think as the industry continues to mature, and as the fallout from ETF approval comes in, you're talking about Bitcoin as a treasury asset there, right? This is what that founder was looking to accomplish. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that, as effectively as a use case, really changes going forward. Because I think a lot of the smarter, more plugged in startup founders will start looking into novel ways to manage treasury, not just in the blockchain and Web3 space, but in other areas of technology as well. I mean, there's a lot of talk around AI and blockchain, for example. There are so many tools out there, composable tools that allow you to basically build your own financial adventure, that if you're running an early stage startup and you're looking for novel ways to manage your treasury and ultimately manage cash flow, there's a huge amount of opportunity out there. It's just understanding it that's the challenging thing.
I feel like, yeah, I mean, you and I had talked about education a lot, and I know that had been your focus when you're working on your math.
Mm.
How do you feel like education has changed even in the last couple of years? I mean, obviously, it's got to be more. It needs to be more. The messaging needs to be better. We need more consistency because as the price goes up, we have more adoption. We have kind of these peaks and troughs, but I feel like overall, everyone's getting more used to it. You hear a term, you read about it in the headlines 1,000 times, and eventually people get curious enough that they really want to start understanding. Do you feel like our education materials are widely available? Are they good enough, or where do you feel like there are gaps right now?
Mm. I think it's the same issue that we've had really for a couple of years, in that there is a huge amount of fantastic technical education out there. So if you're a developer and you want to get started in the ecosystem as a whole, there's a huge amount of information out there about what you can do, where you can build, how you can build it, existing communities that you can plug into, existing projects that you can contribute to. But if you're looking more for the business education side, so right, what is the bottom line impact of implementing, say, smart contracts as a aspect of management, for example, there's not a huge amount of information out there at the moment. So I think that's what the biggest issue is right now. Loads of dev talent, loads of developer education, but getting it into businesses, getting it into organizations in a way that's actually going to have an impact on corporate structure or revenue or any of the other factors that are outside of development. That's what's lacking right now. I mean, what's your perspective on that as well? What do you think the issues are there?
Yeah, the education, I feel like people got a little, I don't know if it's saturated, got a little tired for a while, and certainly that correlates with the drop in price. I would say, as the market drops, people's interest correspondingly drops because suddenly let's take NFTs for an example. This
Mm,
startup I mentioned, their whole business model is based on NFTs. Fortunately for them, it's on finding new utility for existing NFT portfolios. So it's not necessarily creating NFTs. It's not creating hype around NFTs. It's saying you have these existing assets. What more can we do to make these, give these more utility to people? And I feel like, Web3 is fundamentally about connections. The technology
yeah.
underpins. We've tried to level the playing field among people and give people equal voices, or at least corresponding voices based on their input. But certainly, we put that out there, and so I feel like the more people get involved, the more education they need. And the noise of the price, just it's so interesting with the market price always dictating people's confidence in the technology. I would say it's really the first time that I've paid attention to how a market dictates customer sentiment. It's just something that I've
Mm,
never really had on my radar before, never been at the grassroots of something so fundamentally interesting and different like this is. And I suspect for a lot of us, I mean, I'm 42, and for a lot of us, we were young enough through the dot-com bust. It was kind of on the radar, but not really. The housing crisis bust in '08. I was still in school and still didn't feel like I had a great grasp on things and all the interconnectedness of the global economy. So maybe I'm just at the point in my life now where I feel like I have enough data points that I can start forming good opinions about things, whereas before I was just kind of grasping at straws. So I don't know if my instance is typical. You and I spent a lot of time learning about Web3, and we continue to learn about Web3. And so I would say we've got to be on the forefront of that. And I'm not a coder, right? So as people with coding skills who can certainly go in and start mining, you mine some kind of new coin, and if it goes somewhere, great. And they've got a good portfolio of potential assets that grow. So different motivations, different skill sets. So it is interesting to see the way that Web3 is drawn in so many different groups of people.
yeah, and I think the conversation around price is always an interesting one, right? Because if you stop viewing tokens as tokens or coins as money, right, and start viewing them more through the lens of effectively stock tickers, right? So these are all representative of an underlying company. Well, not all, some of them aren't, but I think the fact that there is so much discussion of price, it would be like if the only thing that you spoke about in regard to, say, Apple or Nvidia or Microsoft was the share price. If that was the what dominated the conversation day in, day out, it's kind of understandable why the business application and the more serious use cases haven't been forthcoming, because if you're entering an industry and the only thing that people are talking about is effectively the stock prices, not the underlying, not what's actually going on, then it's potentially a little bit difficult to get into.
Right, and
So
with Bitcoin surpassing silver, right? Didn't Bitcoin become the number
yeah, yeah,
2
yeah,
number 2
yeah,
asset? I mean, that I don't know if
yeah.
any of us saw that happening. All the Bitcoin maxis for sure, but I was surprised. I mean, I think that was just this week or last week when I read that headline, and I thought that is significant.
Yeah, and I mean, just the amount of innovation that happens as well. Like, it's difficult to keep up with. Um, have you been following along with what's been going on with ordinals at all? Inscriptions and ordinals on Bitcoin?
Very, very little. I know enough to be mildly dangerous, but why don't you give me a primer quick and tell me what I'm missing?
Sure. So one of the long-standing criticisms of Bitcoin was that while the halving, whereby block rewards are reduced on a sequential basis at set intervals, does contribute to the digital scarcity. Right, there is a finite supply. One of the long-standing criticisms is that ultimately over time, because block rewards are getting smaller, it means that the incentives to maintain the security of the network are also going to be diminishing with time as well. So there's been a lot of talk around how do you increase transaction fees to the level that miners are still being incentivized to maintain security. They're still being paid for the hardware that they're using, the energy they're consuming. And ordinals have basically ended up being a way to do that. So it allows you to inscribe data on individual Satoshis such that you can attach script files to one aspect of the Bitcoin transaction, which allows you to then create fully on-chain NFTs. There's no references to things like IPFS or Arweave, for example. You're not hosting the data on a third-party service. It's actually there. But this is also going on at the same time as you've got like the ETF approval going on at the same. So you've got so many different things happening all at the same time that it's impossible to keep up with. And that's just one specific subsect of the industry. Then you've got different industry verticals that are appearing as well, with like decentralized physical infrastructure, and then ordinals and inscriptions appearing on all of the chains as well, just to see if they can. So I get it.
There's no shortage of things, and I
Exactly.
always tell people pick what you're interested in. If you like art,
Yeah,
look at NFTs.
exactly.
If you like finance, track your favorite tokens. If you like tech, find the most promising projects and figure out what they're doing well. Well,
Yeah.
we're already over time. 15 minutes goes quickly, and
Flies
certainly
by.
certainly am very very glad that you joined me today. Look forward to catching up again, and wish you well. We'll definitely be in touch.
Likewise, Jonathan. Many thanks for having me.
Same.
And hopefully, I've shared some tidbits of maybe useful information for the audience as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. We'll see you.
Beautiful. Cheers.
Cheers.